To me, it's a deflected form of Marxism. The lens people look at most geopolitical issues is oppressed versus oppressor. Who's the oppressed? Who's the oppressor? We want to be on the side of the oppressed. It is absolutely true that there's a kind of impulse to find Che Guevara type heroes somewhere on the world stage for you to attach your emotional impulses to, as like a kind of avatar of resistance against what you see as this nefarious world order. And don't even get me started about like the pronoun stuff. Like in Canada, it isn't LGBT, it's 2S LGBT because we have this thing called Two-Spirit, which don't even ask.
2S?
Don't even ask.
The marketing's terrible, it's the SS.
It's not the S. Okay.
It's the SS.
It's 2S, which stands for Two-Spirited, which is like an indigenous...
So they say.
It's this...
How would you explain some of the student tent campus stuff that's going on? You just walked through something mad.
So we're here in New York City, and I think maybe a lot of people listening know that at Columbia, which is Upper West Side, there's a lot of activity there, although NYPD just had something to say about that. I was closer to your studios. I was in Washington Square, and they were having, this is Friday night, we're recording this, they were having a Shabbat for Gaza.
Mad.
Well, I mean, I've been to a lot of, tense Shabbos dinners, but this is the only one where the majority of people were wearing keffiyehs. It was, and what was interesting is, I'd say most of the white people were also wearing masks. So it was like people, they looked Middle Eastern or they looked maybe South Asian, wearing the keffiyeh, which is fine. You're allowed to wear the keffiyeh. But then you had these maybe more stereotypical white NYU students, because it's near NYU. And it was kind of more like the whole outfit with like the mask and the sort of political slogans on the t-shirt and like the blue hair and stuff. So it was kind of like welcome to New York, because I just got off the plane, right?
Yeah.
And then I came down and it was like, and I thought, I'm not going to see this. I'm just going to see this up at Columbia. But now you have multiple Gaza demonstrations in Manhattan.
Shabbat for dinner, does that, sorry, Shabbat for Gaza, does that sound, I must be hungry. Shabbat for dinner, I would like some Shabbat dinner, please.
They were giving free food, by the way.
Yeah, what, here?
No,
there.
Shabbat, it was Shabbat for Gaza.
Food.
I didn't take any, because I thought it'd be bad faith.
You obviously weren't that hungry.
Well, I just I have principles, right? I'm not going to say, I don't support your demonstration, but give me a plate of chicken. Like, to me that, I draw the line at that sort of thing.
Depends how hungry.
I wasn't that nibblish.
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you ask me? You asked me a question.
Nibblish is a sect of Judaism. The Nibblish people have a proud, rich history. Don't criticize the Nibblish people. They're good on a Shabbos dinner. For anyone who doesn't know, because in the UK there isn't so much knowledge about Jewish customs and things. Shabbat dinner is the Friday night when the sun goes down, which sounds.
It's a Sabbath meal.
There you go. It's a Sabbath meal, and that sounds deliberately provocative, not just to Israel but to Jewish people.
Well, to be fair, a lot of these events are organized by Jewish people. Like if you go, this happens in Toronto. You see this certainly in some of the protests in the West Coast. UBC, University of British Columbia, is, a lot of the Jewish students who attend Ivy League universities and the Canadian equivalent of Ivy League universities, they happen to be very progressive. And progressive Jews, I would say, are some of the most militantly anti-Zionist students you're going to find on campuses, because they have the license to express it. And it's much harder to accuse them of anti-Semitism because they're Jewish themselves. And, a lot of them come by it honestly. Like a lot of them are just, they happen to be extremely progressive, to use their preferred term in their politics. And they don't like Israel very much. And they are often like kind of pushed to the front of the crowd when it comes to optics, for obvious reasons. So yeah, you see that a lot.
I find that so cowardly, and also because it's supposed to, it's done under the guise of self-deprecating. It's the same as like Americans saying they hate America, British people they hate Britain, Jews, because they know that their thing is getting bad press, whatever their thing is, among their peers, and it's a way of actually, they think they're being self-deprecating. They're not. They're saying the rest of them, the Jews, the Zionists, the British, the Americans, whatever it is, they're bad, but I'm the good one.
Look, I'm not going to pretend it doesn't annoy me, because it does.
Yeah.
However, it's a phenomenon you do see on all sides. So there's an American conservative guy. This is like 20 years. I think David Frum might have told me this. He said, "How can you spot the black guy at a Republican convention? He's the keynote speaker."
Yeah.
Because if you're part
black
of
gay guy.
Yeah. I think this is like 20 years ago, so it wasn't that.
But after that, Milo Yiannopoulos, do you know who he is?
I know exactly who he is, and I'm impressed that you pronounced his name correctly.
Did I, though?
Probably, because I can't. But I just wanted to finish that thought and to say that if you're a conservative or a Republican in the U.S. political idiom, there does tend to be this tendency that it's like, oh look, we have a black celebrity intellectual, and we're gonna push him to the front because we're sensitive to the fact that a lot of people think that we're not diverse enough. And so you do see that. Now, I think sometimes the Gaza stuff I'm a little bit more sensitive about, because it's like the moral stakes are higher. And if you are part of a group or part of an event that, and not all events are like this, but a lot are, that I see as like pro-Hamas, not just defending the legitimate rights of Palestinian people, but an event that's actually pro-Hamas, and there's Jewish people involved. Yeah, to me that cuts deeper as somebody who finds those kind of political sentiments offensive. Mm-hmm. If it is Jewish people who are making that argument.
Well, historically, I mean, is it offensive to say an Uncle Tom? Is that right? I mean, it's the American.
That's the term of abuse that's used within the black community to describe somebody who's like doing the work of the racist white people, and then that kind of term is still weaponized.
The Jews who worked with the Nazis as well.
Like, I mean, as I understand, you're Jewish, so there's like in modern Jewish thought, there's a lot of examples of Jewish intellectuals, Jewish activists being co-opted by movements that ultimately didn't have their best interest in mind. It's absolutely true that Jews were widely represented in Marxism and socialism, early 20th century, interwar era, and of course, ultimately, Soviet communism ended up being profoundly anti-Semitic. However, for decades, Jewish intellectuals saw potential in a movement that seemed to emphasize the equality of humanity and was going to break down barriers of class and aristocracy. And, this isn't the first time that Jewish intellectuals have been co-opted into a movement that, at least in my mind, goes against their interest.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Does a lot of what's happening on the campuses come from, and this is the ultimate question, but anti-Semitism? Is there some?
So I guess I'm kind of heterodox within conservative circles on this, but I don't really consider myself conservative, except in Canada. If you're not like a completely doctrinaire progressive on all of the issues, you get lumped in with conservative.
Yeah,
so
the UK as well.
So I've stopped kind of like fighting it. It's like, fine, if you want to call me a conservative. It's not how I self-identify, but I respond to it. So could you repeat the question? Because I was just so busy defending myself.
Defending yourself from imaginary attackers.
Demons, yeah.
They're all attacking. You're imagining all the commenters, all the guys. Well, you did so well before, but with saying about how Jews have often been part of things.
Oh, the campuses. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just going to add that because I do get a lot of people who are quite far right wing who will comment saying, "Well, you guys started doing this because you got all the woke Jews and the progressives and all this stuff."
Yeah. So what I would say, I have never felt that the mainstream anti-Israel sentiment you see on campuses, at least in Canada, is motivated by anti-Semitism. I tell people that Canada is the least anti-Semitic country I've ever been in, and that includes Israel itself.
Wow.
I think instances of anti-Semitism you see on the right or on the left, in the age of social media, it's very easy to isolate them and say, oh my God, look what this person tweeted, And so, I mean, you do often see instances, horrible instances of anti-Semitism that people say, or placards or something. But again, in the age of social media, a million people will see one guy holding like some horrible sign about like the gas chamber, some like crazy horrible thing, and that's just very uncommon. It doesn't really exist that much in Canada. What I've always said, my impression is that the attacks you see on Israel, the vicious, um, it's quite virulent. Like some of the things people say about Israel and accusing of genocide and all this stuff. To me, it's a deflected form of Marxism. And I think a lot of students come by it honestly in the sense that the lens people look at most geopolitical issues is oppressed versus oppressor. And we're not going to get into like the roots of this because I'm sure there are many people listening to this have heard all about like Marx and Marcuse and Fanon and like, I mean, it's just like there's a dozen thinkers, Edward Said, who you could name drop them and say these are the people who are responsible for making modern college students obsessively focused on that particular lens to see geopolitics. Who's the oppressed, who's the oppressor? We want to be on the side of the oppressed. And it's kind of like this binary dynamic. And the problem is once you identify that binary dynamic and say, okay, well, X is oppressed and Y is the oppressor, then that's it. You just like, you launch yourself headlong into a defense of the oppressed and vilifying the oppressor, even though most geopolitical conflicts are more complicated than that. I have always thought that that's basically at the root of why so much academic discourse and campus activism is so virulently anti-Israel. Now, what happens is you often do get a smattering of genuine anti-Semitic bigots. And I saw this in Montreal, because I grew up in Montreal, and I remember at Concordia University. So Concordia University was, I think maybe most people have heard of McGill University. Concordia is like maybe the second tier English-speaking university in Montreal. And in the 90s, you had some pretty vicious protests against Israel. Actually, 2002, I think, if I remember correctly, was the worst of it. Netanyahu had come to visit and speak at Concordia, and he actually wasn't permitted to speak. He had to speak somewhere else because there was a vicious riot. I remember I was covering it for my newspaper. They set up a Palestinian checkpoint. For those who are listening on audio, I'm making little air quotes. And they were spraying ketchup on people to symbolize like the blood of Palestinians. It was like pretty lurid stuff. And by my observation, you had 95% white Marxists, and then a smattering of people who were genuine bigots, some of whom were foreign students. And I happen to know this because there was one guy who later became infamous. His name was Laith Marouf. He went to live in Beirut, and he was subsequently outed as like this really vicious anti-Semite. What was quite appalling about it is he actually launched a career as a government subsidized consultant on media issues and got like hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Canadian government to consult with them on how to make community radio more inclusive, like all the while tweeting about how much he hated Jews. It was like this completely, so if people want to Google him, it's Laith, last name is Marouf. I wrote an article about him for Quillette. Anyway, I encountered that guy, like this is, again, 2002. This is, over 20 years ago. And there was like a group of guys, kind of like seventh year, film students, just guys who are just never going to graduate but they hung around campus. They ran for student government. They ran for like VP, student services. There's like kind of a type of guy who like never actually goes to class, but is constantly immersing himself in the civic life of the university, often in a very toxic way. And this guy was one of them. And those people, they absolutely were not the majority of the anti-Israel constituency that I observed, but they were the most prominent and certainly the most disgusting in their views because they were just so obviously animated by bigotry. And I think you still have that where the vast majority of students are kind of naive Marxists I would say they're not necessarily doctrinaire Marxists. They're people who see the world in that lens of oppressed versus oppressor, and they come to their anti-Israel advocacy that way. And then you have a much smaller group of people who really don't like Jews very much. But they're not the majority. I don't think they're the majority.
Yeah, we should hope not.
No.
And it is scary, and I suppose we have a problem as humans with numbers. We obviously grew up in tribes of 80 or 160 people. We look at things like COVID, and we saw like, oh, these numbers of people were dying, and we just panicked and we went crazy. You know, we wouldn't get in a car if we actually thought about the stats around people who die in car crashes and things. So when I see or you see people being anti-Semitic or virulently anti-Semitic, it is quite scary, and we don't always appreciate that most people are not, I'd like to think. What do you think then of, I saw Matt Walsh talking about this the other day. There seems to have been in the US, there's some sort of bill put forward, an anti-Semitism bill. Have you heard about that?
I have. I gotta say, I tend to depart from other culture warriors on this stuff because like I've seen where this leads in Canada. So in Canada, we have this situation where whenever there's any kind of social panic about any type of hate or whatnot, we end up getting like grants. And, Canada has some kind of, the federal government has somebody who's in charge of fighting Islamophobia. And, anti-Semitism is always high on their list in terms of fighting it. We have like tons of anti-racism programs. During the BLM period, our government set up government programs to give money to Black-owned businesses where you had to be a Black person to get this kind of money. So like everything that's trending on Twitter, our government in Canada sets up a taxpayer-funded program to promote that. And don't even get me started about like the pronoun stuff. Like in Canada, it isn't LGBT, it's 2S LGBT because we have this thing called Two-Spirit, which don't even ask.
2S.
Don't even ask.
The marketing's terrible. It's the SS.
It's not the S. Okay.
It's the SS.
It's 2S, which stands for Two-Spirited, which is like an indigenous.
So they say.
It's this.
What was the SS stand for? Something socialist.
You know what? I don't want. We have to be careful not to follow Godwin's law here and escalate everything to.
I'm going to put it in the trailer.
Yeah, I'll leave that for your promotions department.
They're Nazis, you tell me.
They're not absolutely not Nazis because Nazis are real, and 2S is an imaginary gender category that it's a quote unquote anti-colonial gender category.
Yeah.
So if you have an indigenous bloodline and you're anti-colonial in your political sentiment, you get to call yourself Two-Spirited.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so this was intended as a drive-by digression, but as I was saying, never mind the 2S LGBT stuff, which Justin Trudeau has made a particular political fetish of. I have seen up close, being a Canadian, what it's like to be in a political system where every time there is a kind of social panic about a kind of bigotry or a kind of intolerance, we get like a government program to fight it. And as a result, social policy ends up being this just kind of like agglomeration of anti-hate programs that were trendy for 20 minutes, but now just end up being part of the bureaucratic framework. And you can't get rid of them once you have them. I mean, who wants to be the person who gets rid of like the anti-Uzbek, anti-racism thing? Like this, the 17 Uzbeks in Canada will be up in arms.
Yeah.
Why do you hate Uzbeks so much? Like we have this great program. Like anyway, so I'm very skeptical of any kind of like religiously or ethnically or spiritedly specific program that is produced in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the political moment, responding to what's on the front pages. Because and by the way, and conservatives of all people should know about this. Like think about, we all remember Black Lives Matter, right? When like, Wall Street banks were putting black squares in their Twitter handles, and multinational corporations were singing the praises of a group that was explicitly Marxist. And they did that because they got caught up in the moment and they wanted to do the right thing. And even in that moment, I was like, really, like this, 6 months from now, this is going to seem ridiculous, as indeed it did.
I suppose there was perhaps a need to show solidarity with Black people in the country.
It was all well intentioned, and I can see it, especially since you have you might have your own workers saying, "Hey, look, what are you doing for this?" And by the way, so I have a friend. He actually is very good about listening to podcasts I'm on, so he might be listening to this.
Oh.
He is in the pharmaceuticals industry, worked for a big pharmaceuticals company, and like in mid-October 2023, he got into a big fight with his colleagues because he said, our pharmaceuticals company needs to put out a statement about like how we're against anti-Semitism and we're against Hamas and we're like, solidarity with Israel. And in broad strokes, I agree with his politics. But I remember saying to him, it's like, is it really the job of a pharmaceuticals company to denounce terrorism? Like, I kind of just assume that the people who make aspirin don't like terrorism. Like, I don't need them. I don't need them to say, by the way, we hate terrorism.
Yeah.
And we hate anti-Semitism.
And if they did love terrorism,
that's a problem for me, but I'd probably still take aspirin.
Well, a friend of mine said, he's a doctor, and he said, you've got to keep an aspirin. And everyone remember this aspirin in your house, because if you're having a stroke while you wait for the ambulance, you should have an aspirin. It's the best thing. Look that up to double check it, everyone. But that's the thing. Now, if you've got the choice and you know that aspirin is pro-terrorism,
right?
I'm still taking that aspirin.
Yeah, but what if you found out like the other alternative was Advil, and like they had horrible ideas about some other issue? Like, if once you start, you'd be there clutching your chest, doing this complex philosophical analysis. But I mean, to my mind, I assume the people who make Advil, the people who make Tylenol, the people who make aspirin, all over-the-counter drugs, I assume are produced by people who are against terrorism. And if somebody says to me, I need my employer to come out in favor of transgender rights or against terrorism or this or that, it doesn't matter if I agree with them. I don't really feel comfortable pressuring banks and corporations and even sometimes governments to like do performative stuff on this.
It's I think it's quite insidious because these are companies that, I mean, I'm a capitalist. I like that they do what they do. The company is set up to earn lots of money. Get all your money you want, do your job, and they're trying to pretend, or they're being made to pretend that there's something else.
Yeah, although that puts us down another road because so the hotel I checked in here in New York City, sustainability is a big watchword, right?
Right.
So instead of a plastic key card, it's like
wooden.
Yeah.
I'm in that hotel.
Okay, so you've seen it.
I think
it's either wooden or it's faux wooden.
Yeah.
But whatever it is, I'm like, oh, instead of a sliver of plastic, you've handed me a sliver of wood because this is going to save the earth. Now, do I begrudge them for doing this? No, because this is like, you've seen the hotel. It's like a hipster paradise, right?
Yeah.
That the fridge is Smeg. That insufferable hipster brand.
Yeah.
The lobby is like a parody of like a hipster bar.
Yeah. They've got a pop-up suits.
Yes, there's a pop-up closet. Like the whole
with a guy
thing.
who's clearly out of his mind on something. Did you meet the guy?
No, because I'm not. They wouldn't even let me into that store. Like
that guy is on something.
Okay.
Wow.
I hope he's not listening to this.
Well, he won't know who he is.
Okay, that's true.
No, right? He won't know who he is.
Okay, but I'm saying, so that hotel, somebody in the marketing department said, hey, a lot of our young, cool, hip customers are into sustainability. Imagine if we handed them a key card that wasn't 4 grams of plastic, but 4 grams of wood. Like, yeah, it's like brains exploding across the room. And these days, corporations do all kinds of stuff like that. And the thing is that's part of capitalism too. Like part of capitalism is doing superficial, silly things that create your brand. It's the same thing. Like I know conservatives, this has turned on my end like a bitch fest about conservatives, which I did not intend it to be. But like a lot of people have noticed, like especially Canadian commercials, like 4 or 5 years ago, Canadian ad agencies, like the whole thing, it turned, the actors who were recruited for ads all became like BIPOC. And I know people who like say, oh, have you noticed like very suddenly, all these, you can't turn on a commercial and it's just like, And I was like, okay,
I
yeah.
just say that means minorities because we don't use that in the
Oh,
UK,
so
I
sorry,
don't think.
Black, Indigenous, and person of color.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a Canadian thing. But like, I say to them, okay, well, whatever. But like, did you notice how 10 years ago you couldn't turn on a newscast without seeing like a blonde white woman with perfect teeth? Like that was arbitrary too. Like big corporations and advertising agencies, they're in the market, like they're in the fashion industry. And if something's in fashion, they're going to pick actors, they're going to pick aesthetics that cater to that. And it's always been superficial. And it's never been representative of the population because everyone in advertisements is good looking and has perfect teeth, which is maybe it's like 15% of the population.
It was already a shallow industry.
It's already
trying to
completely
pretend it's
shallow.
not.
Yeah. And big banks and all that stuff, they've always been, this term virtue signaling.
Yeah.
Everyone virtue signaling, like corporations especially. It's just a different kind of virtue signaling now. So
where it does wind me up, the DEI stuff is in places where it's not so superficial and it's not about someone's look. So
right.
I mean, I found it. I used to make TV documentaries, and was told from now on we do want your ideas, but you're going to have to be off camera, and we'll have somebody who's a minority on camera.
Oh no, okay, yeah. That is a problem when it's somebody who has an idea can't present their idea because they're wrong skin color. And you Canadian arts, you do see that, and the same thing when you're recruiting professors or students, because there it's substantive. It's like you're in, you're out. I guess for me, it's my little mini rant was more about things that we should acknowledge are already completely superficial and meaningless.
I suppose what someone else, just to still man the opposite side of what you're saying regarding advertising, is that some people would say, but this isn't what's actually in vogue. This is what's in vogue in a very, very small set of elite university students. And that, there's that expression, go woke, go broke or whatever, that it's not actually what's best for their own interests or our interests. It's them arbitrarily going along with this Marxist thing.
That may be the case. However, if like the Bank of America or its Canadian equivalent wants to shoot themselves in the foot by having advertisements featuring unrepresentative demographics or whatever, that's their problem.
Yeah, but we're still going to be pissed off about it and complain about it.
Maybe. I mean, it's not like people are going to stop complaining about banks or whatever anyway. But at least in that case, they're playing with house money. Like this, that's just, they have a marketing budget. There's some ad agency that's showing them, well, here's what the ad's going to look like. And someone's saying, oh, perfect. That's so in vogue right now because, for political reasons.
Sure.
But that's their decision. Like I have no problem with that because it doesn't affect society in the way of undermining, say, meritocracy in academia or in performing arts, or the example you gave where somebody has a good idea for, say, a documentary, but for purely racial reasons.
The modeling thing, I totally agree. Actually, like for someone to. I have a lot of sympathy for people who went through what I went through, or what loads of people gone through, which is like you were talented for the job, you were right for the job, but you couldn't do it because of your skin color. But the modeling thing is like, well, that's the whole point. Is like what is popular, as you say, to look at. And you get loads of people who complain. A lot of the models, they told me to be skinny, and And I do have some sympathy, but I also just think, well, do a job that isn't. I mean, the fact that you're even being considered is because you're fortunate enough to look better than 99.9% of us. Like, what did you?
You and I will never be on the cover of Italian Vogue.
Maybe that's a challenge.
Yeah.
Italian Vogue, if you're listening.
The other Vogues maybe, but
Jonathan Kay and I, we've got something to say. Now, I've got a nice suit.
Yeah, we discussed how nicely you dress now.
Yeah, well, this is what it's about. Thank you to my guest booker, Ash, who has been advising me not to wear black T-shirts like all the other podcasters because my arms are not as muscular.
I was scared I was going to walk into yet another
black T-shirt
studio, but I was pleasantly surprised to see Baby Blanket Blue.
Is that true though? Did you feel pleasantly surprised? And did you feel that about the black T-shirt?
I was pleasantly surprised in the sense that because I podcast from home, I associate podcasting with like a very dungeony aesthetic. Like, because I sometimes do video, but it's usually audio. So aesthetic preparation isn't like front of mind when I do my podcast, and I have done podcasts in bathrobes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to admit that.
I'm not going to send me the pictures later, but
no. So to come in here, well lit, beautiful office, well-dressed production staff and host. Yeah, it's a nice surprise.
This, we try. You got to give every percent, don't you? Because there's too many podcasters. You got to give the extra 0.1%.
I love what you're doing here.
That's what it's about. Thank you. With regards to DEI, I guess the problem is if you're given a job as the guy who enforces the anti-Semitism thing, not DEI. I'm not talking about DEI, but don't be mean to Jews. Don't be mean to Muslims. Don't be mean to black people. All that stuff. You've got to keep finding problems, or you're out of a job.
So this is the problem we've seen. Like the typical pattern you saw at a Canadian university is that in 2020, late 2020, all of these places, I'm sure it happened in corporations, but you saw it in universities, is they all did DEI audits. So that was often the word that you saw, audits.
Okay.
Is, well, you had some university administration, they're saying, what are you going to do? Everyone's talking about this issue. Everyone's talking about George Floyd. Everyone's talking about racism. Everyone's talking about white supremacy. What are you going to do about it? If you're a university administrator, the easiest thing you can say is, well, we're going to study this problem. And so you set up a committee, and the committee hires an outside DEI consultant. And the DEI consultant spends 18 months or 2 years analyzing every single nook and cranny of the university to find all the many racisms. And then there was a period, I guess it was in maybe 2022, when all those reports started to land. So UBC, that was a particularly gigantic report, and it was like this cycle where like everything that people were all excited about in 2020, 2 years later, all these reports started to land. And then they landed, and I was like, ugh, what do we do with this now? Because like the moment had passed, the moment when people had convinced themselves that Canada was like a white supremacist hellhole, like no different from Nazi Germany or apartheid era South Africa. But then that social panic passed. But then you got this report that had like 187 recommendations to decolonize the university. And the university, and this, like, I've read these reports. I've actually written about it because the reports are crazy. It's like, we talked to students who said that they felt unsafe and they felt that, the university is a colonial institution and we need to do this and we need to do that. And the prescriptions they're offering, like, just are completely out of proportion to the one or two minor acts of intolerance that are described. But then you've got, once you have commissioned these reports, you have to do something. So there has never been a DEI auditor who's been brought into a major organization whose report started off with the words, everything's great. Like, it's not going to happen, right? Yeah. And it's, in that sense, it's unlike any other industry. Like, if you buy a house and you get a home inspection, it's often the case that the home inspector will say, well, I inspected the house, it looks great. Like, the foundation's sound, there's no knob and tube electrical stuff, roof looks solid.
You know what it is a bit like, unfortunately, is what you and I do. Journalists, that's I think a valid critique labeled at us. If there's no news, you've got to find the news. If there's no problem, you've got to find the problem.
But we don't make as much as consultants. So, like, we have a right to be crabby and, but the problem is that it's absolutely true what you say, is that, like, without problems in the world to report on or to complain about, you and I would be out of a job.
I used to do a lot about Scientology on a different channel, all about Scientology. And all I wanted was, we were trying to do, me and the other ex-Scientologists, is bring down Scientology.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, off the camera. No, not seriously, because I don't want to put these guys in it like, oh, they didn't really want to end. So they did. But off camera, like, what would we do?
Right.
I suppose that's just me. I don't want to speak for the other ex-Scientologists and stuff. But, like, what would I talk about next? Like, isn't it great for the next 30 years? And people might go, oh, that's selfish of you. But then I go, no, but that's my job. Like, if you're told your job's going to go away, I was legitimately concerned about that. Oh, great. No Scientology today for the next 30 years. I'd have to find something else to do. And it would still be a victory.
By the way, this is the critique that people have of the gay rights movement, is that at least, in many countries, like, gay marriage, which is good, I approve of it. Gay marriage was legalized in Canada about 2 decades ago. Gay men and gay women began to have all the rights, finally, that straight people have. But then you had all these well-funded gay organizations that were like, okay, well, what happens now? And so what you saw is like with Stonewall UK is that you get institutional drift because, I mean, this is a well-observed institutional phenomenon, is that once you have a group whose mission has been successfully accomplished, never in the history of these groups have they said, well, I guess we'll just return all the money to our donors and go work at Starbucks. Like, you find new things. And so as a result, there was this very rapid migration to trans rights because for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure you talked about with other guests, but part of it was just like, if you have gay marriage, if, you know, the United States was sort of the last domino to fall there among major Western countries where, you know, it was like, once gay marriage was the law of the land in the United States, what do you do with all this money and influence that all these groups have? And so, yeah, so this is a problem you also observe, but it's the same thing you get with these DEI consultancies, where once you've engaged them, they're never going to come back and say everything's great. I don't know why you called me. Like, you know, I've never seen a more tolerant organization.
Yeah.
Like, because I've probably read about a half a dozen of these reports as part of my report, and it's all, there's so much work to do. This is just a start. Like, even once you implement all these recommendations, it will be but a mere grain in the sand on a beach of racism. Like, it's just this never-ending thing, because they're kind of like, the world is full of Scientologists, and they're exposing them, and you know,
you're trapped in a hamster wheel.
And by the way, I'm not saying they're lying or they're disingenuous. If you're in that industry, it might be because you believe that there is this systemic, unfalsifiable.
Well, it's both. You convince yourself, don't you? I mean, there's a lot of studies on your beliefs are formed based on your
self-interest.
Yeah,
sure.
So you tell yourself that you need to really root out the.
I mean, just look at people in a tennis match arguing whether a ball was in or out.
Yeah,
they both argue with equal conviction that the ball was either in or out, depending on what.
Never the other way, is it?
Never.
My ball was out.
Never.
I hit it out.
Why can't you take the point? Yeah.
Give Nadal the point, for God's sake.
Yeah.
There's something called the Diamond Diversity Report in the UK, which does sort of all the different. They monitor everything, and it's exactly what you're saying. I look at it every couple of years. They do a new report, and you know, it's bonkers, because at first it was like, yes, there may be an overrepresentation now of women and of certain different minorities and things, but what about backstage, you know, not just on screen? So then 2 years later, backstage, it's way overrepresented now. So they go, but what about in the top jobs backstage? It's like, well, you only started doing this 2 years ago. Why would the senior people also have but 2 years later, senior roles? You get like women. I looked at this report. It's loads of it's about women are not, you know, backstage and not in big roles and stuff, because they're not directors. The directors are like 70% men, but they don't mention, it's all like in tiny writing, that the showrunners who are employing the directors, the people in charge of the entire show, it's something like 90% women on British TV.
Really?
Yeah, it's insane. And fine, I don't care. Like, so now the report is going, yes, but also how many electricians working behind the scenes?
So I will see you and raise you, because I think it was 3 days ago, the major group that represents workers in Canadian film and television began a campaign in regard to hair and makeup styling equity.
Yes.
So apparently there's not enough two-spirited hair and makeup specialists.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
It's sorry. You know what? I know you like the two-spirited things.
Yeah.
I think it's not just two-spirited. It's also BIPOC, women.
Are there enough men in hair and makeup?
I'm guessing actually they're probably underrepresented.
Men are underrepresented.
But I think the mere fact that they've gotten to the hair and makeup back office,
that's where we are, suggests
that like maybe some of the more prominent audience-facing stuff has already been addressed. But it's like, you know what? It's always good to acknowledge when, you know, the people we're kind of like making fun of or that we're skeptical of like had a point. It's talk to anybody who is in the film or television industry 20, 30 years ago. Like, there's a reason Harvey Weinstein was able to have a successful career despite being a scumbag for so long. Like, it's absolutely true that there's all kinds of sexism and racism in a lot of these industries. So like,
whenever you think he was allowed to get away with it because he's a white man?
He was allowed to get away with it because he was a powerful actor. who happened to be a white man, but like at a time of a generation where most of the people who had the power happened to be white men. I'm not saying because Hollywood is a white supremacist dystopia, but
Bill Cosby got away with it for just as long.
Is he black? See, I don't see race, so yeah.
I have no idea. I don't know who Bill Cosby is. I'm British, but I'm told he's somebody.
Can I tell a funny Bill Cosby story?
Go on.
So there was a Montreal radio station that, so every radio station has like this sort of, I guess it's not physical tape anymore, but it's like this sort of emergency audio that they play if there's like a fire in the station or like everyone has to leave the building or if the computer system goes down, so that when people tune in, it's not dead air. So it's just like you tune in and there's something, right? But you need something timeless. It can't be like a weather report from 5 years ago, or it can't be like, here's the latest news from, an election. It has to be something. And so for this particular Montreal radio station, it was a comedy routine. And they had programmed it like 20 years ago in the age of, the Cosby Show. And there was an actual emergency in the studio, and they ran out and they were all listening to the airwaves, and it was Bill Cosby. And this was like at the height of his trial.
No.
It was like at the height of his trial. And they were all on the street, I think it was Green Avenue in Montreal, listening to the radio. It was like, oh shit.
Just Cosby. I suppose in Britain it would be like Jimmy Savile playing.
Yeah, well, no, that, if anyone has a darker epilogue than Bill Cosby, it's Jimmy Savile. Because there was kids.
This is why I get so wound up. I was getting wound up before because of this idea. We've anthropomorphized companies like we do to dogs. We think they're like humans. We think companies are as well. They're fuzzy, nice humans. And I suppose they've tricked us into doing it. And as you say, that's their right. And that helps them.
Sure.
Because, why not? But we've done that. And we've done it with things like the BBC. They call it Aunty, the Aunty B, which is really Orwellian when you think back at it. They sat there and let Savile get away with this kind of shit, and there's more stories like Savile, none as bad as that. And then they're sitting there trying to lecture about things like I can't be on their thing. They now do. They ask when people try to get jobs at the BBC, just in the back room, whatever. They ask what their parents did for jobs. That's Bolshevik stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're trying to extend the concept of diversity to. Sometimes when people give their positionality statements, which we neglected to do, they will say things like, I am a first-generation college graduate. Like
What's the positionality statement?
So your positionality, I think that's a fancy word for saying like how you approach the world. And if you take an intersectional approach to life, then the way you approach the world, your positionality is based on your gender identity and your socioeconomic status and how many spirits you have and all this stuff. So I think it's kind of like, there's like this whole vocabulary of like praxis and positionality and survivance, which is a word apparently that people like. It's kind of like, usually it's like a real word that's slightly modified in a pretentious way.
Okay.
Like you don't say oppression, you say systems of oppression.
Right. So we would have, if we were doing if we were progressives, we would have started with what was it, status of positionality.
Do you remember there was a famous Microsoft video? They did a product launch 2 years ago where the guy came on and say, "Hi, I'm George. I'm wearing a checkered shirt. Yes. I'm a white male, half Hispanic. I'm cis. I'm this and this." And like it was just absolutely ruthlessly mocked because everyone hates Microsoft anyway. And to have all these dweebs come out and then like tell us about how they look and who they like to have sex with is just like super weird. Yeah. And especially like it was one older guy who was clearly uncomfortable and just said like, I'm Dave.
He's just towing he's just having to do what he said. A poor guy.
It felt bad, yeah.
So almost at the other side of that guy who was the NASA guy who wore the sexy sexy shirts, and he was sort of, do you remember that guy?
No.
There was the guy, he wore like, it was like a shirt, he had just done something amazing. I don't know what it was. It was something like landing something on something unbelievably amazing.
He's a rocket scientist. He does cool rocket scientist things.
And it was a stupid choice, but he did like the press conference or whatever it was, wearing a shirt that had lots of little naked ladies all over it. Oh. But he was just like fired, lost everything, and just that poor guy. And I suppose that's the other extreme of like, that
sure.
Sort of,
but I mean, how old was this guy?
40.
40, yeah. There's no defense at 40, but
maybe
like,
30, I don't know.
If you're 60 or 70, you're probably old enough to have been rewarded with like laughter or at least fake laughter when you'd show up to someone's bar mitzvah in a tie like that.
Yeah.
It's like you'd have a tie with like some kind of soft porn theme on it that you got in Vegas, and it was a conversation starter, and everyone's like, "Oh, Harry, you're irrepressible," and like there was an era where you can get away with telling dirty jokes at the office, and by the way, like thankfully that's gone. I mean, I always, again, returning to a theme, every political movement is half right, and progressives and even some of the people who monitor language, it's absolutely true that some of the things that even in my lifetime, and I'm not like exactly the crypt keeper, things you could say at school and things you could say at jobs, like I remember thinking back to some of this, like you telling gay jokes and whatever, like that was not cool. That was really dumb.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we live in a world where that kind of stuff is stigmatized. Don't necessarily think like you should have your life ruined because you tell a dumb joke, but
that's the line, isn't it?
Yeah, that is the
Between
line.
being able to say that was misjudged,
right?
You said a racist or a sexist thing. It doesn't mean you are a racist or a
Just
sexist
Dave,
person.
stop being an idiot. Like this, like we don't live in 1985 anymore. Like save those jokes for your frat buddies or whatever. Like
we live in 1984 now.
Oh, well played.
Just go back
well
a year.
Played, yeah.
Well, let me ask you. I was thinking about something. I think you're good to answer this. I lived for a long time in Argentina, and in Argentina, it was one of the first times I became more open politically and more understanding that there are nuanced views and all different directions, different kinds of things going on, just different system from all of ours. And I came to realize that the nationalism was on the left, which I maybe to you is not a surprise, but to me when I was 23 was a huge like what? Because I'd grown up knowing nationalists were these right-wing lunatics with the England flags or whatever it might be, but it was all the Argentina flags. It's all the guys on the left. The right wing wanted to sort of open up internationally. The left were closed off like that. I think Canada, UK, US, probably Australia, I don't know. It has been on the right, but now you've got the right who are sort of quite anti the US. Do you know what I mean? Sort of with the Russia-Ukraine stuff. The left are also anti-US. So where is nationalism in the US now?
So, I mean, in a way, I can speak more to the Argentinian frame of mind because I know that, especially when I was younger in Canada, it was the same type of thing. It was the idea that like the United States is the 800-pound gorilla of the Americas, and protecting Canadian identity from America, what it meant protectionism. And so we had this whole welter of protectionist movement, like the Canada Wheat Board. We had like a dairy cartel, cultural protection up to yin yang. The whole basis of the CBC, which is like a loser version of your BBC, is based on the conceit that we have this like super valuable Canadian culture that needs to be protected and subsidized. And but there's some truth to that. I mean, every country, even Canada, has its own culture worth protecting. Like magazines, radio, theatrical productions, movies, like movies in Canada, no one watches Canadian movies. They're 90% subsidized. They basically are subsidized so that they exist.
Yeah.
The idea is that we need some kind of native Canadian filmmaking industry. And a lot of these things were created on the conceit that we're sharing the Americas with the United States. They're the big, powerful cultural hegemon. And so to be a Canadian nationalist meant high taxes, cultural protectionism, trade protectionism.
Exactly the same. Yeah, Argentina.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I've never actually been to Argentina, but I can understand that sort of point of view. What you have now in terms of like right-wing nationalism, and you see this in Canada, is it's rooted in a disaffection with what is sometimes called like the elite point of view or the globalist point of view. And we're getting into some like you get some kind of loony people who go on about that kind of stuff. But basically it's this ethos that says there is a kind of elite monoculture out there. It used to be, remember when people would obsess over Davos, and now they obsess over the WEF, and they still obsess with the Bilderbergers.
Yeah.
And now
you're going to get shit for this.
Look, the idea that like the future of the world is being plotted at any of these conferences is to me ridiculous. However, they make a useful stand-in, a useful proxy for the idea that there is an elite globetrotting monoculture of like-minded people who all have corporate interests, who all have very similar political attitudes, who all speak many languages and have no problem diluting the independent cultures of nations. You see this a lot in Europe with like French farmers who don't want the, supranational agricultural policies interfering with their ability to produce, unpasteurized cheese or whatever the hell French people eat.
Yeah.
Like it's this, so you see this in Canada too, and you see this in the United States, where the right-wing nationalism expresses itself as a hostility to any homogenizing intellectual movement that exists independently of national cultures. Call it the WEF, call it like wokeism, call it globalism. I mean, and their opposition to free trade, there's a certain logic to it because, like France got there before other people. They realized that if you had free trade in food, people would be eating at McDonald's instead of like eating, farm to table unpasteurized cheeses or whatever, which is true. I mean, it's like if you're shopping at Walmart, you're probably not going to be buying food that comes from the local farm, right?
Yeah.
So to me, and then what happens is, and this is the really unhealthy part, is that you start finding your champions in any global leader who stands up to that system. So Vladimir Putin, who's an imperialist and a thug, becomes a hero to you because he's a guy who thumbs his nose at the United States. And in a sense, it's the mirror image of the left who they have these fantasies about what life is like in Iran or in Gaza, because to them, there's like this heroic opposition to the world order, which they regard as capitalist and American-led. And so they just are naturally sympathetic to anybody who says, fuck you, to that international system of rules, such as the rule that you're not supposed to kill 1,200 Jews in a savage terrorist attack. Like,
Sure.
and as in a weird kind of way, the shockingly morally transgressive nature of that act gets reinterpreted as kind of like a bold strike against the capitalist world order. I mean,
freedom fighters.
Yeah, but I hate saying the words both sides because both sides hate it. That's the thing about both sides. They hate the term both sides.
Yeah.
But it is absolutely true that there's a kind of impulse to find like Che Guevara type heroes somewhere on the world stage for you to attach your emotional impulses to as like a kind of avatar of resistance against what you see as this nefarious world order.
Cult leaders.
Yeah. Yeah, and Hamas, like, and you get these ludicrous juxtapositions where, like queers for Palestine. And, as everyone points out, it's like you last 4 minutes in Gaza before someone threw you out a window. Like they wouldn't care about, your placards saying about how much you hate Israel. They just...
So is nationalism left for the center?
I mean, nationalism is just... I am yet to find a recipe for nationalism that doesn't drift left or right. That's just kind like the only recipe for nationalism I know that doesn't drift, like just have a natural centrifugal character, which is to say that it sort of attaches itself to left or right movements, is the nationalism of sport or the nationalism of culture or the nationalism of Eurovision.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, growing up, I'd always, my American and Canadian friends, we could never understand this Eurovision nonsense because the songs were always so terrible.
Yeah.
Right? It's like...
It's the worst thing in the world.
It's like, and now a song for love. And like...
But it's camp. That's
it's
the thing.
completely camp, but I kind of have this appreciation for it because you'd have, if like Letonia won, you'd have 5 million Letonians in the street.
Lithuania.
I'm picking Letonia because it's a fake country. I don't want to make fun of Lithuania. So okay. Letonia.
Any Lithuanians listening? Any similarities between Lithuania
purely
and
coincidental?
Lithuania?
Yeah,
coincidental. It's like that South Park thing.
Even though they dress identically and eat the
Yes.
same food,
yes,
and have the same weird language
and songs,
yeah, which are terrible.
Yeah,
but so by the way, Letonia. I didn't make up Letonia. Letonia is a fake country that was made up in a famous Canadian comedy show called SCTV.
Right.
However, my point is that as ludicrous it is for all these Letonians to go out on the street to celebrate because like the most famous Letonian folk singer won for her song for Letonian love and freedom, the Eurovision contest. Yes, it's camp. Yes, it's silly. Yes, it's ridiculous. But that's at least a healthy, apolitical form of nationalism. In the same way that, like, this is an Olympic year, right? When the Olympics come, and some Canadian pole vaulter or archer or tetherballer or whatever wins a medal, I'm going to be like, yeah, you're the best.
Yeah.
Being in Canada is amazing because we are the best pole vaulters.
You guys missed that in Canada and America. You missed because you got to wait for the Olympics every 4 years, whereas we've got like the soccer, football. All the time. England are playing against Brazil or
You always lose though.
Yeah, but we joined together in national unity over the loss.
But
Almost more so.
Right.
It increases national pride.
Yeah.
We've got a song, "Football's Coming Home." Do you know the song?
No.
It was misinterpreted by other countries as a very serious song that football's coming home to England because we're going to win everything. But it's actually a sort of joke at the fact that we always lose.
Right.
So they couldn't. It was maybe sort of English humor, British humor. I don't know what.
I'm not interested because soccer is dumb.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
There you go. No, I understand that. But that's the point. It has to be dumb and uninteresting because it's apolitical, then, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, by the way, soccer or football, as you call it, is not dumb. It's a wonderful sport, which I know from watching this incredible comedy called Ted Lasso.
Oh, so I hate it.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're coughing so I can talk interrupted about how great Ted Lasso.
It's awful.
So what's great about Ted Lasso,
terrible.
Don't listen to him, is it shows you the fanatic world of soccer through the eyes of a clueless North American.
That is what it
So
does.
Ted Lasso becomes, for the 5 people listening who haven't heard of the show, it's the conceit is that there's this guy, he's an American football coach, like the kind with the oval ball, who, for reasons that I won't explain here, somehow becomes the coach of a struggling, it's called Richmond in the show, this soccer. I'm saying soccer, even though it's football, just to differentiate it. Well, there's this Hungarian guy at my tennis club who went absolutely nuts every time I'd say the word soccer.
It's the single most boring culture war ever is soccer versus football, and that's why I just if I'm talking to an American or Canadian, I'll just say soccer. And if I'm talking,
I have a better contender for that.
Go on.
Listening to Greek people and Macedonian people argue about who gets to call themselves Macedonian.
Well, that's quite niche.
Well, to me, it's like a bespoke hipster culture argument. But have you ever heard them have that argument?
I don't remember
it's
the last
insane.
time I heard Greek and Macedonian people say anything.
Yeah. They'll talk for like hours about it.
Yeah.
Like it's really, because I'm kind of like, okay, can we just agree there's like 2 Macedonias? One that's in like the real Macedonia, and that's like, whoa, what's the real Macedonia?
Obviously North Macedonia. Right, that's done.
Anyway,
no, I don't know.
Yeah. So but that and the soccer thing are both tedious.
Yes. Yeah. The soccer, football, who cares? There'll be loads of comments, and the people say to me, "Oh, you're a traitor saying soccer." Who cares? I'm talking to an American or Canadian, and because I don't want to say football, because then they will say, "Oh, you mean soccer?" I don't want to have that conversation. Right. I never in my life want to have that.
But you just had it.
We had it ironically.
Okay.
We're dimensions ahead. And if we did have it, it's your fault, not mine.
It's 100% my fault.
I did everything to avoid the poor listeners who have to have that conversation. Who cares? Language is language and it's different. And who gives a shit? Where can people go and find your stuff? Where should I go, Quillette?
So they can find me on X at Jon Kay, Jonkay. My respectable day job is at Quillette, where I'm an editor and a podcaster and a writer. I also have a couple of Substacks. One is called Deeply Problematic, which will be boring to anybody who's not Canadian. The Substack I'm really pimping because I want to get to over 100 subscribers is my LGB Substack, Let's Get Bored. It's a board gaming Substack. And I Substack about the world of board gaming.
Wow.
It's exactly as exciting as it sounds.
That's niche. Do you want another one about Macedonians and
I'm going to combine them. I'm going to find a historical game about really that part. So I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. Thank you.
Wait, who's a heretic you admire?
Oh, wow. I'm going to say a heretic. It's kind of the first name to jump to mind because I was just reading her social media, is Martina Navratilova.
Tennis player.
Yes. So I'm old enough to remember her in her prime, winning Wimbledon. Just an incredible, two-handed backhand. I kind of modeled parts of my own fourth.
I've got a two-handed backhand.
Yeah, well, based on just the little pantomime you did, it's kind of looks more like you're
Sorry, there we are.
okay. Yeah,
you were thinking of something rude, I think.
Well,
I was doing with my hands.
It looked like you were kind of like, I don't know, whipping yourself or something. But okay, yeah, no,
that comes after. That's the bonus part for locals.
So, so I admired her anyway, just as a tennis legend at the time. And you know, like over time, I learned as I grew, I learned, you know, she happens to be like she's a trailblazing woman for all kinds of reasons. And then in recent years, she's you know, the easiest course of action for these aging sports legends is just like show up and sign your autograph and don't say anything.
Yeah.
You know, give motivational speeches at big corporations. But no, she has gotten involved in the debate about protecting women's rights, including in the athletic domain. And yeah, so for me, like the fact that she's an inspiring athlete, an inspiring woman, and an inspiring voice for common sense in the battle for biologically based women's rights in sports, to me, she's the full package.
She's a great heretic.
Yeah, great
people.
Heretic.
Please go check out Quillette, check out Jonathan Kay's Substacks. I'll put the links down below. Wonderful sounding Substacks. Please hit the like on the video. I always say I think it helps. I don't even know. And I'll put a thing here. That's another episode to watch, because you just got to keep watching, because that's the thing to do. So keep watching the thing. Keep watching this thing.